Hi everybody, this is Ken Krogue and Michael Cheney. The webinar today is called The Science of Sales Communication. I'm really excited to be doing this webinar today with my good friend Michael Cheney. He's the former CEO of Persogenics, the founder, and he's now part of InsideSales.com. So we're really, we've been looking forward to this a long time, haven't we, Mike?
We have. I'm glad to be here. This is exciting.
We're going to jump into the world of personality assessments, communication traits, and see what we can do to help salespeople, sales managers do a better job at managing, training, retaining. We've got some fun questions we'll be answering today, but I want to get back to the basics for just a minute, everybody. Remember that definition of inside sales is professional sales done remotely, and even what we're doing today is a form of inside sales. We're presenting remotely using On24, one of our great partners, and this ability to project presentations around the world or individually with our prospects or clients is a big part of inside sales, and inside sales is still growing 300% faster than the traditional sales model. One thing we have found over the course of the last 8 or 9 years, we've done research studies almost every year, and for the first 7 or 8 years, the top challenges for a manager over an inside sales department was getting enough leads. But 2 years ago, Mike, everything shifted. After the crash, we ran out of enough great inside sales reps, so the biggest challenge was hiring new people. And then leads was second and training was a close third. Last year, training moved into first, and so the whole world has changed with a focus on hiring, training, recruiting, and getting people up to speed. So what we're about to talk about has become very, very relevant. So a little bit of background. Mike Cheney, his father worked closely with this man, Dr. Gordon Allport, back in the mid-30s at Harvard, and they put together the first personality assessment. And what Mike has done with Persogenics is they made that commercially viable. I remember, Mike, you told me the first assessment had like 200 questions, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Oh my gosh, you'd be here half the day. And where is it now? What have you gotten it down to now?
Got it down to 24, and that's about as low as we think we can go. We've been experimenting with other things, but 24 seems to be the number.
Gotcha. Now, so this is the headwaters of the personality assessment for business. This is where it all came from. Almost all the other organizations came from this original research. The companies you may have seen out there, to show you a few of them, you've heard of DISC and Color Code and PI and 16 personalities. My background personally, my degree's in psychology. I joke a lot. I've got a bachelor's in psychology, which is almost useless. I'm qualified to push a broom in a psych ward somewhere at 2 in the morning. That's about all I'm good for. But if I kept going for a master's degree, I could actually get a job, which I don't know if I want a job anymore. But anyway, but for 12 years after I got my degree, I focused my hobby and my research on personality theory. And about 8 years ago, I met Mike Cheney, and he gave me this assessment, Persogenics. Now, this is my own personal one, and I found something really interesting. I found that, the other assessments, they told me what type of personality I was, but Mike's assessment was unique in that it told me what level of percentage I had actually developed it. So it was a weighting model that I hadn't seen in the others. Isn't that pretty unique to what you've done, Mike?
Yes, very much so. The others are linear, and they can tell you, you're in this group or you're in this area, but it doesn't tell you the degree to which you'll use that in various situations.
Now, many of you have already taken the assessment that we offered with this webinar today. I think we're well over the 200 mark of people who've taken. About 250 people have taken this assessment, and we're excited to share with you some of the things that we have found. But what I wanted to do now is jump into, you're all here for the same reason. You want to know Who am I? What do I, what kind of personality type am I? If you see from my graph right here, the assessment that you've gotten, if you've taken, and if you haven't taken it, folks, go ahead and do it right after the webinar today while you're still thinking about it. But notice that you'll get 3 basic overviews. You'll show your dominant personality traits from here at work, how you see yourself, and how others see you. Now, in a work environment, I usually go with the first one. So you can see I'm almost off the charts expressive, with my second trait being dominant. So I would be what's called an expressive dominant. Now, I don't normally display a lot of analytical behavior. It's probably because the accounting department was always my enemy all through my sales career. I call it the anti-sales department. But I've learned I have to I have to become friends with them if I want a paycheck. So anyway, analytical is not my strength, but I'm good at analysis. That's a different thing. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent here, Mike. I'm going to turn the time over to you.
I can't imagine you going off on a tangent, Ken, as an expressive.
That's just sort of how it works. You and I are expressive together, so we go down rat holes, don't we? We get pretty excited.
Yeah, we do. We do.
So I'm going to turn the clicker over to Mike. He's going to answer the questions, who are you, and help you understand how Persogenics can be used in your world. And there's lots of fun questions that we'll be following. So, Mike, take it and go from here.
All right, great. Listen, the most important thing is you've just taken an assessment that truly has a great value to you. And one of the reasons it has a great value to you is that it is going to identify things about you. Now, today, some of you saw that you had a dominant, expressive, analytical, and amiable characteristics. Well, that's because all of us have those patterns in us. We just use them to varying degrees. The assessment that you took, in fact, if you looked at page 5 of that, it'll look much like what Ken's did. It'll tell you the pattern that you favor in a work environment. It tells you the pattern that you favor personally, just being yourself. It'll tell you how others will interpret you when they meet you and interact with you, which is very valuable for salespeople to know because of their conversations, and this is what the other person is seeing and hearing in the nature of the person. So, as we talk about these 4 patterns, we're going to emphasize and give you some information about each one that's going to help you accomplish more sales, help you accomplish better hiring and job matches to fit the position you have and what you're going to be doing. So let's begin by talking about a little about these 4 patterns. And there we go. All right. Here's what our studies have shown us. Now, we update this study about every 8 to 10 years for the last 35, 40 years. And this is the current breakout here in this country, the U.S. and Canada. It's 37% of the population will be amiable. Now, I've had a lot of amiable today, so that means that you are a very large portion of the general population. 32% are analyticals, and that's pretty self-explanatory. We have a total of 69% of the population favors making sure that we all are working together, making sure that we're doing everything correctly. Then we have 19% of the population, which is expressive. I love the expressives. I wonder why. And we have 12% that are dominants. So sometimes people will say, Mike, 12% dominant sure seems a lot bigger. Well, that's because when you meet a dominant, they seem like there's more of them than just one. So that's what happens there. Let me give you an example of a few people that we have that are going to be people that you should recognize. One of them, here is a dominant. I'm sure you recognize that we have jobs here. And he is known for doing these kinds of things right here, and that is he wanted results and he wanted control of those results and how they get done. And he's a great example of that as a dominant pattern. Now, I should say something here. You're made up of all 4 of these patterns. What we're talking about right now is your primary pattern, the one that is the highest degree above those numbers, above your charts. So this young man who did quite an accomplishment with building of Apple, did it because he was interested in control and results, and he's very dominant in nature, even though he had some of the other characteristics. Then we have, I'm sure you're going to recognize this person, the expressive. And the thing that you recognize about him is, I'm trying to make this work better, apologize, relationships and the big picture. Every time you hear this person talk, what is he talking about? He's talking about the big picture. What are we going to do? How will it work? What is the vision? What is the future? And it all centers on relationships. People being able to talk together, be together, do all kinds of things. That's very, very expressive in nature. 19% of the population. They have, some of you may or may not recognize this person, but they are very much well known right now. She has just become the CEO, Marissa, at Yahoo. She is very analytical. She's known for her structure, for her organization, for her ability to put processes in play that will equal a good result. And that shows up also in this very fact that she is interested in the processes being done right the first time. And if they're done right the first time, then we're going to grow and we're not going to have problems. And we're going to resolve problems by having these processes in play. Then we have somebody that any of you who have ever seen Walt Disney's movies, you will recognize, the amiable. Now, I know we have dominant written there on his screen, but somehow or another we meant that to be amiable. So the amiable.
See, dominants are getting in everywhere, Mike. They show up everywhere. They want to control everything.
I tell you, we can't get a hold of these people. It's crazy. Anyway, Walt Disney's very famous amiable pattern really wanted to help people, wanted children to be happy, wanted families to find enjoyment in the entertainment field, in the cartoons, in the other products that they offered, the Disney World. All of it is built around the idea of group and family, and that's what's important to the amiable pattern. It's all about trust and avoiding conflict. If we trust each other, then we won't have conflict, and if we don't have conflict, then we're all going to feel good and trust each other. So very amiable in nature, and very famous man, without a doubt. All right. Here's our breakout of the registrants right now. We have 37% of the people who have now taken an assessment today for this webinar are amiable, are expressive. 33% are dominant. 15% are amiable, and 15% are analytical. Now, this is interesting because if this was strictly a sales session, we would usually have a larger percentage of the expressives and the dominants. The fact that we have 30% of this audience has fallen into this analytical and amiable mode, that's significant because not all salespeople are expressive dominants. Quite frankly, it depends on what the product is. That's why it's so important for you to understand yourself and the product and the job that you have. Does it fit you and your nature? And that determines whether or not you are comfortable and feel that you can do well in that position. And this is the breakdown of inside sales. We have 46% of our people are expressive, and 29%, almost 30% are dominant. So there we have 70. We have a reversal of that. But that's because we are a sales company, and consequently because of that we have a tremendous amount of people who fit into our environment, which is very expressive and dominant environment. Our CEO happens to be a dominant. That's David, and he is interested in results.
Dominant, isn't he?
I know, but he might see this, and I don't want to offend him, like I would, right? He's definitely a dominant. Nah, he doesn't get offended. He doesn't worry about that kind of stuff. But he does like results, and he does like control, and that's where his focus is. Now, this next, I could talk about him for a long time, but I don't want to, overtake the menu here. Ken Krogue. Ken is so relationship-oriented and big picture. When it comes to being able to know what we need to do in the future in this company, it's Ken Krogue. He can see how things can happen. He knows how to make them happen. That's the expressive nature. Now, the closers, the ones that do closing in our company, you'll see we're up again, huge number for our closers. But then we go to our engineering department and look at the reversal that we have here. We've got 45% are of an analytical nature, and thank goodness that's the only way we would ever have these things work. 26% are amiable. They know how to work together in the group. It's great. Then we have the account managers. These are the folks that are going to take care of the clients, and you'll notice that 70% of them are expressive. That's because expressives love people, and they love to help people, and so that's where they're at there. Then we have what are the 4 types? What do they need? Well, let's talk about each one of those, and let me tell you what they need from their manager, what they need in order to feel good about their work. First of all, the dominant. The dominant is interested in the bottom line. Whenever you want to talk to them or interact with them, you have to keep in mind that time is of the essence. You've got to get to the bottom line. And then we have the expressives, and the expressives are relationship-oriented. They can sell to anybody, but they like to sell and they like to build a relationship. And if they're a manager, they like to have a good relationship with their people. The analytical is process-oriented. That means that they want to make sure that things are going to be done right. And that's why they're a little, appear to be slower at making their decisions. It's not that they're slower, it's that they're accurate. Why would I make a decision unless I knew that the results would be correct the first time? So consequently, that's their focus. And then we have the amiables. Everything for amiables is built on trust. Why? If we trust one another, if we trust the people we work with or that we sell to, if we can trust them, we don't have conflicts, and we don't like conflicts. And to avoid that, we try to make sure we never promise something we can't deliver. We try to make certain, as an amiable, that what we say is accurate. And so that's why they are known for being people who can listen well and you can trust them. How do you recognize these patterns on the phone? This is fun. Let me just kind of demonstrate this for you very quickly. First of all, the dominant. You'll always recognize the dominant on the phone. Let me use a couple examples here. Let's say you call a dominant. Here's how they might answer the phone. Cheney. Mike. Yeah. Short, to the point, identifies who they got, but the question is, why aren't you already talking? Why are you waiting? And so they are very interested in start with the bottom line. If you start with the bottom line and you're not going to take more than 2 minutes, I'm going to listen to you. And if I like what you have to say, I'm going to give you more time. But you got to honor time. If you don't want to honor time, not going to work right. The expressive, outgoing. You always meet them when you answer them on the phone. And this is the approach that they take. Hello, this is Mike Cheney. What's up? How can I help you? You'll notice that right away they seem to be smiling. Even if they're having a bad day when they answer that phone, they are aware that there's a person on the other end and it's a relationship building opportunity. So they almost always sound up and they sound excited, positive about things. The analytical will answer a phone like this. Hello, this is Mike Cheney. How may I help you? You'll notice that the voice is somewhat monotoned and it's not loud. It's kind of in the middle. And it has the proper English to it, the proper process for answering the phone. Why? They like things to be in control. Now, the amiable pattern, when they get on the phone, they do things like this. Hello, this is Mike Cheney. Can I help you? You'll notice that the whole thing sounds kind of questioning, kind of, well, why are you bothering me, or why are you calling me, or are you somebody I should know? Everything is very cautious, and so with them on the phone, you have to recognize right away you're going to have to speak softer and a little quieter. All right, next slide is going to how do you recognize them face to face? If you're not an inside salesperson and you're outside, this is another one of those steps that's very easy to understand. First of all, let's talk about the dominance. If you walk into a room or up to a desk and the other person is dominant, they're going to come forward, either lean forward across the desk or come around the desk, and they're going to offer to shake your hand. And when they do, they come towards you, they look you right in the eye, and the handshake will always be very firm but brief. And you'll recognize them quickly because of that process. They'll direct you to where you should sit, and they will tell you things rather than ask you things. They won't say, so what are you doing here? They'll say, what are you doing here? Or why do we have this appointment? Or I understand you're going to talk to me about. Everything is very direct, very, very, not forceful, just direct would be the right way to say that. The expressive, you'll recognize them. They will stand up if they're sitting. They'll come forward. They'll smile, but their face kind of lights up. Whether they know you or not, they go into a relationship mode. They smile. They say, how are you? They'll ask about you. How are you feeling? Did you have a safe trip? Do you need water? Do you need anything? They're very relationship-oriented, and they're warm. They're friendly, and the smiles are usually always there when you're dealing with them. Now, the analytical, when you meet them, this is kind of a fun thing. Any of you who go back to your offices, if you know you have an analytical there, if you want to have fun, just kind of reach up and move something slightly on their desk, just a tiny bit, and watch. It'll drive them crazy until they move it back. Anyway, the analytical, when you meet them, it's proper. They don't move fast, so if they're behind a desk and they stand up, and they move around the desk, or they hesitate, and then they see where you're going to go, and then they'll go to that same position. They might offer their hand in a handshake, but it will be more of a kind of a hesitant thing to see if you want to shake hands. They're very proper. They will look to see, is there more than one of you here for this presentation? Do you need an area to work in to show or demonstrate? And so they kind of observe every around them. What they're looking at is that process. So they stare at you. Their faces are somewhat blank. They might ask questions without a lot of expression on their faces. And then we have the amiable. And when they stand or come to meet you, it looks like they're not sure what they're going to do next. And that's because they're trying to make certain that they don't step into or that they don't create a conflict of some kind or not get off to a good start. So they're a little hesitant as they come around. They don't necessarily offer to shake hands at all unless you extend your hand, then they will. They kind of are waiting. They're watching to see where the foundation of what this meeting is going to be and how they should interact with the person that's talking. How do you sell to your opposite? Well, let's talk about that. Who are the opposites? Well, the dominants and the amiables are direct opposites of one another. One moves fast, one moves slower. One wants things done now, one wants things done involving other people. So they are naturally somewhat opposed to each other in the way that they think. So how does a dominant sell to an amiable? Well, you sell to an amiable remembering that everything for them is built on whether they trust you. They'll never buy something from you if they don't trust you. So that process means for the dominant, you've got to slow down. You've got to not do the bottom line statements all the time with an amiable. You have to be able to discuss it and ask questions and then listen to what they're asking and then address what they're asking and then ask them whether that was sufficient information or do they need more. Selling to an amiable is a matter of asking questions, confirming that they have what they needed, and recognizing that this is a pattern that will respond not to a loud voice or a fast voice, but will respond more to the voice that you're hearing me do right now. Kind of methodical and consistent, not loud, not soft, not fast, not slow. And if they are comfortable, that means that they are beginning to trust you, that you're not offending them, you're not running over them. So if a dominant is selling to an amiable, you've got to ask, not tell. You've got to slow it down a little bit. You have to remember this group doesn't get to the bottom line until they know everything, and they know how it's going to affect their group and their organization. The amiable will take longer to sell for the dominant because of that process they have to go through. Now, if you're an amiable and you're selling to a dominant, this is a tough one for you because you've got to start telling rather than asking. Your natural characteristic will be to ask a lot of questions, but you've got to change a little bit how you ask them. For instance, instead of saying, well, what are your feelings about such and such, or what are your concerns about your organization? Those questions are weak in the eyes of a dominant. So what I want to say instead is, I know that you have at least one, if not two, or maybe even more things that need to be changed in your organization. Which ones are most important to you? See, I was telling them what I knew, what I wanted, not asking them. So amiables, you need to be a little more assertive by telling rather than always just asking. And you need to pick up the pace a little bit. Now, it's hard for amiables to pick up the pace when that's not their natural nature. So what we tell them instead is if you use intonation in your voice, then it sounds like you've picked up the pace. So just by putting more intonation into your voice as you're telling them what you want and asking them questions, that makes it sound like you're moving quicker. Let's talk about the opposites, the expressive and the analytical. They are diametrically opposed to each other because of the way they think. Now, it doesn't mean they can't communicate well and aren't good friends with each other, but they don't think the same. For instance, an expressive, when selling to an analytical or managing an analytical, their concept is relationship is the key. So they want to be kind of friends with the analytical. They want to build a relationship. They do that by telling stories, by painting pictures, by giving examples of all the people who've used their product and how great it's worked for them. That's the Expressive's way of trying to sell. But if they're selling to an analytical, they need to adjust that, because analyticals don't think big picture. They think detail. A has to go to B, B has to go to C, and if it doesn't go that way, we have to go back and look at our process to make sure we understand why it doesn't. So, Expressives, what do? You have to ask questions, not tell them stories. So, for instance, you would say something along the lines of, tell me, what are your 1, 2, perhaps even 3 major concerns that you have that your data supports needs to be fixed or changed in your organization? The analytical goes, whoa, this is good. This person understands how to look at information to make decisions, not just a big picture or happy-go-lucky. So the analytical respects and values the Expressive that will talk about detail, will answer questions, and then confirm that the answer was sufficient for that analytical to understand the process or what we were talking about. So analytical expresses, you need to tone it down. Best way you can do that, by the way, is just fold your hands while you're talking, because when you start talking and your hands or your body starts to move, if you get up and start walking around, if you start rolling in your seat, those are all things that speed up your verbiage. It makes you talk faster. But when you restrict your movement while you're talking, it slows you down, and that slows you down into the same pace and speed of an analytical. Therefore, they understand you and they can connect with you. Now, the analytical, when you are trying to sell to an Expressive, you want to start with A and explain how things work. You want to go through a process with them. The difficulty with that is Expressives cannot focus on the detail until they first understand the big picture and then what that detail has to do with that big picture. So if you start with the detail, they're a little lost. They don't know quite where you're going. They aren't going to be able to listen to you. Whatever you first start talking about, they won't get that. So you have to begin by saying, look, what I want to show you today is how by using our power dialer, this is what's going to happen to you. You'll see these 3 specific things. Then you talk about those specific things with them, but they understand those things because you painted the picture of what we're talking about. So you have to remember analyticals. You have to also pick it up a little bit in your tone. You have to be careful not to sound too monotone. You have to have a little expression in your voice. Don't try to make jokes, because analyticals, usually you're not good at making jokes. Expressives aren't good either, but that doesn't matter. Everybody still laughs at their jokes. So you have to realize that when you're selling to the Expressive, you've got to be a little bit lighter. When they break up your sequence of your presentation, you can't let that disturb you. You just kind of go with it. And you
wait, you mean like how I do, Mike? How I always jump in? Is that what an Expressive does?
Very cute, Ken. Good example. Works every time. So analyticals, big picture first, detail second. How do you manage the 4 patterns? Well, if you're on this call and you are a manager or a supervisor of any kind, let's talk about the process of how you manage them. First of all, let's talk about the dominant. If I work for somebody and I am a dominant pattern, my manager needs to respect my time, not call me into a lot of meetings that go way too long and don't get to the point. Don't sit and chat with me at my desk for more than 2 minutes. They want to have clear goals. So what is it you want me to do? What is the process? Is there something specific that you need? They want to know what it is you are going to be measuring them on. That way they can have control over that. They want to be recognized for their success, but it's different than some salespeople. If you're managing a dominant, you can go by and simply look at them, and when they look at you, you can give them a thumbs up because they just closed a deal of some kind. And for the dominant, they go, yeah, that's right. I'm the man, I'm the girl, I'm the woman, I'm the boy. Whatever it is, they get excited. Just with an acknowledgement from the manager, I recognized what you did, it was great. Now, does that mean they don't like to be recognized in front of a big group? Yeah, but it doesn't have it's a variable depending on whether or not they feel a need to actually be recognized in front of everyone. Usually they don't need that. They just want the manager to know, I did my job, you recognized it, I have value to you. So that's what the dominant wants if you manage them. You're not going to be their personal friend. Dominants have a statement. They say, look, I don't have to like you to work with you, but if I respect you, then I can work with you. So don't ever expect the dominant to want to run out and go to lunch all the time with you, or go fly fishing, or ride horses, or you can tell what I like to do right there, can't you? But anyway, you've got to be careful to remember they don't need all of that. What they need is recognition that they get things done. Now, the expressive. Ken, that's a lot like David, the head of our company, isn't it?
Yeah, it's spot on. He's the most productive person I know, and he's sort of the willpower that drives this whole thing forward. It's pretty awesome.
Okay. So let's talk about the expressive. How do you manage the expressive? If you have the expressive pattern and you're a manager of expressives, one of the things you're going to say is, boy, these are great people, but they're high maintenance. And, of course, expressives who hear that, they go, I don't like that term. Of course we don't like that term. We think we're great, and there's no reason for us to be high maintenance. You just got to pay attention to us a little bit and talk to us and let us know how a great job we're doing, and let us talk about that, because we like to verbalize our thoughts. This is the only group of the three that has the ability to think out loud before they make their decisions. And so consequently, because of it, if you're managing this group and you want to have them accomplish something, they're going to want to talk about what that might look like or how that might be done. And when they're talking about it, they give the impression that these are the things they would do, when in reality they're doing what the other three patterns do in their heads. They're just thinking out loud. They have to hear their words before they know whether what they've been talking about is something they can accomplish. So if I'm a manager and I have an expressive, I have to remember they turn back after they've talked out loud and said, now that I've talked about it, or now that I've thought about it, this is what I think I'm going to do. And it may be different than what they talked about, because that was their process for thinking out loud. Also, if you manage an expressive, you just got to remember that this is a group of people that do like it when you plunk down next to them for a few minutes and chat, or you show up and say, hey, let's go to lunch. They like that. They want to feel that they have a relationship with their manager. And a relationship with their manager means their manager likes them. So that's important if you're managing expressives, for them to feel good about working hard. Expressives also will have a tendency to want to please their managers. So if the manager needs extra effort on something, if they ask the expressive if they could give more or ask them to do more, the expressive will jump all over that to keep a strong relationship. Now, the analytical pattern is very interested in the process of not making mistakes, doing things right. So when you talk with them and you manage them, you don't ask them questions about how do you feel today, because they don't deal with feelings the way that the expressive does. The analytical, how do I feel? Well, let's see, how do I feel? What? You mean in relationship to work or to my family or to... See, they don't know what that means because it isn't clear and specific, and you're not asking questions that are clear and specific. So with an analytical, rather than saying, if you're managing them, rather than saying, how are you feeling, saying, what's going on right now? How are you doing on? And ask them specific questions, because that they have answers for. They can tell you, well, on that deal, we're doing this and this. Now, the manager probably just wants a bottom line answer, but the analytical can't go to the bottom line unless they explain A through Z to get to the bottom line. So you have to be prepared to listen, ask questions so that they know you're listening to them, making sure that the facts are all there. When you say, hey, listen, why don't we all work harder and do this, that doesn't mean anything to the analytical. They go, that's not clear. And so they'll drag their feet a little bit because they're not sure what you wanted. So you've got to deal in facts. You've got to give them straight information that says, listen, here's what I need. Here's what I'm looking for. Let me answer any questions you have about how that should come out, how I'm expecting that to be represented, things of that nature. Now, the expressive pattern, the amiable pattern, if you're managing an amiable pattern, you need to remember that the amiable does not like conflict. And so consequently, the way they avoid conflict is they don't tell people what to do, they ask people to do things. Therefore, if you're managing this group, the way that you have your most productive relationship with them is you ask them to do things. Now, they love to work with other people. And if their manager is open and willing to listen to them from time to time when they want to talk, they will respond extremely well to being asked to do more. Now, they have a natural nature when you're asked to say, yes, I think I could do that, or yeah, that's no problem. All of those mean no, by the way, when you do that with an amiable. Instead, you need to confirm with them by asking questions like this. Amiable, I would like for you to do such and such. Now, I know you're busy. Can that be worked in today's schedule? Because it really does need to be done before the day is over. Now, the amiable then takes that and they go, oh, my goodness, I got all kinds of things on my plate, but let's see, where could I do that? How could I do that? And while they have that look going on in their mind, the manager, if they happen to be dominant expressors, are thinking, what's wrong with these people? They're not giving me an answer. No, they're giving you an answer, but they're not going to give you the answer until they know that they can do it, because to give you an answer to get you off or away or to acknowledge that and have you leave would only mean that I'm setting myself up to be in a conflict situation, and I don't like that. So the amiables are a little cautious, a little slower. They like to work in a non-stress environment, and that talks about the amiable and how to manage them. How to interact with your manager. Well, if I'm a dominant pattern, here's how I do it. I have to remember I need to know the pattern of my manager. What is their personality? What is their pattern that they use here at work? The best way to do that is have your managers take an assessment, and then you'll know exactly how to work with them. But if you have to interact with your manager and you're dominant, you have to remember that if they're not dominant, then you need to soften the approach a little bit. You need to be willing to spend a little time listening to what they have to say instead of going in your own mind right to the bottom line. You need to also keep in mind that if you have a dominant manager, then you need to go in, you need to be 2 minutes or less in your presentation, you need to know specifically what the result is that you're looking for, and you need to present it no more than one or two options, and actually 2 options is too many, one's better. And that's how you do it with the dominant. Now with the expressive manager, if you're expressive, you have to remember that more than likely you're going to be talking big picture. That's natural for you to do to try to get across what you want to talk about, which will sound a little scattered to anybody who is not an expressive manager. And so consequently, what you'll have to be aware of is that you need to bring it down. Don't move your hands and your body. Get yourself positioned before you begin to talk. And by doing that, you'll actually present the information in a very accurate process. Okay, if you're analytical, what you've got to remember to do is you've got to go in and you might have to go big picture and not go so much detail. And if you're amiable, you've got to remember you've got to go in and you've got to speak up. You can't be too soft or they can't take you seriously. How to manage, train, and retain. This is the big question. How do you manage and retain these folks? Here's how you do it. If you want good people, you better make sure that you know the nature of the job, not the functions of the job. That's the easy part. They have to do this, 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 and this. What you want to know is what is the personality, what is the nature of that job, what is the culture that that job is. And when you are going to manage people, you've got to make sure that you've hired the right people to be in that culture, to fit that job. You've got to train people according to their patterns so they'll understand how to use the information that you're giving them. If they're dominant, they've got to understand how to sell to other patterns, expressive other patterns, analytical other patterns, amiable other patterns. And how do you retain your best people? You make sure that the ones you hire match the job, and that the job and the manager are in cahoots with each other in knowing what to do to motivate and to retain folks. That's what it's all about. And Ken, anything you'd like to add?
Really, yeah, this one's really interesting. This is an article on Forbes. And the one main question, Michael, is, I mean, we've always heard that having a diverse team is the best way. Is that really the best way, especially in sales?
No, not necessarily at all. Now, within an organization, yes, diversity is great. But you'll notice in our organization, we have a predominant amount of dominants and expressives. But that's because in our organization, it's a sales organization, so it's a specialty kind of team, and they need to match that accordingly. Diversity there doesn't work in the same method. If we had a lot more analyticals, we would have a longer process to get to a close, as an example. So, no, specialized teams are very important. That's, all, again, one of the reasons why you want to use a Persogenics kind of process. That is identifying who you want to hire, making sure they match the job, and then making sure that they're trained so that they'll stay.
And that's critical, the way you define that. I love that, Mike. Diversity is key for an organization. But as we've been talking about for years, specialization is a key platform for the inside sales model. And there it starts to make sense to actually specialize by communication patterns. So I think that one's really, really interesting. So, you know, you mentioned, Michael, a couple of times that you know, if we're a rep here on the call today on this webinar, it might be really helpful to get your manager to actually take one of these assessments. So let's move to this next slide here, and we're going to make that available. We're really trying to offer our clients, those who are considering what we're doing, a chance to really experience what Michael's done today. Now, hopefully everybody who's on the webinar has already taken the assessment, but we're showing that so far you've all been so busy you haven't all done. About 25% have taken it so far. That's still available. We'll leave it out there for another 48 hours. And but if you're on the call on the webinar today and you would like your manager, if you're a rep, to take it, we'll make that available so you can give them the opportunity. And if you're a manager, so this is really key, we have a really fun reporting system that's called InSync. And so we will allow managers, if you're already on the call, or reps, if you refer your manager to take one, they then can have 5 assessments to experience the InSync report of how they interact with their team. Mike, could you take a minute and just talk through what that InSync report is?
Yes, the InSync report we developed it because we had managers who kept saying to us, we need to understand our employees better, those that what motivates them, how do they think, how do they make decisions, how do they like to be told if they're wrong. There's 12 areas we go into there. They're very valuable for a manager to know how to manage and to coordinate and lead their salespeople into a success factor. And that's what that's all about. I really encourage all of you who are managers, you need to do this thing. If for nothing more, it'll give you some insight that will really help you succeed even more so as a manager.
Great. And then because we wrote, refer over to your manager, or if you're a manager, to offer this to 5 people on your team and then experience that InSync capability. I think you're going to love it. Please reach out to Michael or myself. And we've got, you know what, we're basically out of time. We've had quite a few questions come in. We will address and answer those questions in the ebook format of this webinar. But we're already there. And Michael, thanks so much for joining us today. This is going to be a lot of fun. But remember, August 20th, we'll have a follow-up seminar on the science of predictive hiring for all you managers. Thanks again, Michael.
Thank you, Ken.